Washington Bureau Chief Jerry Seib, the man we go to for the real political wisdom. Jerry, what can you tell us at this hour based on the information that we have about how this is playing tonight?
Well, look, I think you know enough to know that it's going to be a pretty close race. It's going to be potentially a long night, and it looks a lot like the way it looked at those closing national polls, including the Wall Street Journal and NBC News poll, which is a close race nationally, but with some signs of continued Obama strength in some key swing states. So, you know, it's going to be a battle between the national vote and the swing state vote, I think, through the rest of this evening, much as it's been through most of this campaign. You look at... Sorry.
Yeah, the polls in the swing states and the exit polls to some degree do seem to favor Obama, but Republicans are arguing that the polls are overcounting Democrats. What do we know about that at this point? Still too early to say?
Well, it's a little too early to say, and what you don't really know, the X factor, and what exit polls can't tell you, Alan, is what real turnout was. You know, they have a sampling of what kind of people showed up, but there are going to be pockets where turnout was unusually high for Democrats or unusually high for Republicans, and that's pretty hard to find until the actual results start to come in. I will tell you that the good news for President Obama in the exit polls that we've seen so far is that his overall job approval rating among people nationally who came out to vote today is over 50%. That's usually a leading indicator. The good news, on the other hand, for Mitt Romney is that slightly more than 50% say he's better able to handle economic problems than President Obama. So you kind of get to pick your exit poll finding, but that 50% job approval has always been a pretty critical one.
Jerry, let's take a look at the swing states here. If we can put our swing state chart up on the screen. There are 11 of them, of course. They are the states that where the race has really been fought. And the two early ones that seem critically important, I'd like your view on this, are Virginia and Ohio. Virginia and Ohio. If President Obama can win those two states, he's going to be very hard to stop. If Romney wins those two states, he's probably going to be on the road to an upset. If they split two ways, then we could have a long night ahead of us. Does that summarize it about right?
I think that's pretty much right. You know, and I think there's been too little attention paid to Virginia, frankly, because if Mitt Romney doesn't win Virginia, it's very hard to see how he makes the Electoral College math work. He really needs to win Virginia and then Ohio. But the first part of that sentence is important. He first needs to win Virginia. It's a state that should be friendlier to him. It's a little more red, and it's one where people had kind of expected him to win, but it looks very, very close right now. So that's an early state. The polls are already closed in Virginia for an hour. We may know more about Virginia in the next 2 hours, and that could be determinative. As you suggest, it might not be, but that's the really crucial first data point of the night, I think.
It's a complicated state, too. We're going to be talking about that over the course of the next hour or two. It's a complicated state because you have the suburbs of Washington, D.C. that are suburban, higher income, and then you have the much more rural downstate parts of it. And turnout in both of those places will be very critical in determining the outcome.
Right, and in those northern Virginia suburbs of Washington, which is really Obama country, there were a lot of anecdotal signs today that the turnout was very high there. That's conceivably a good sign for the president. Downstate, down in the Hampton Roads area, the key there for the Obama forces is African American turnout. You know, the trick for Republicans in Virginia is to run up the vote everywhere else, particularly down in the southwest corner of the state, which is coal country, not Obama country. So it's a balancing act. Who runs up the vote more in their parts of the state?
Let's talk about the math here a little bit. If we could, Harlan, if you could take us to that bar chart that shows the 11 swing states and the road to 270. Do you have that one? Okay, well, take us to that when you have it. But, you know, adding up those 11 states to get to the critical number of 270. For Romney, that pretty much has to mean, as you said, Virginia, but it also has to mean North Carolina, Florida, and probably Ohio. Without Ohio, he'd have to win some states in the West. Is that fair?
Right, yeah, I think that's right. Without Ohio, he has to win a lot of the smaller ones. He certainly would have to win Colorado. It would help if he could win Wisconsin without Ohio. He'd certainly have to win New Hampshire and probably Iowa. So there's kind of an inside straight that he has to run without Ohio. But let's not skip past one that was first on your list, Alan, which is Florida. You know, the night starts for Mitt Romney by winning Florida, and that looks very close as well. That's one also where there's a part of the state that's clearly the Obama part of the state, and it runs across the I-4 corridor, across the central part of the the country, at least some of those counties. And there are other parts in northern Florida that are clearly Romney country, and a lot of the state is up for grabs. That is an essential part of the Romney coalition. So you're right, it starts with Florida and Virginia. If he can't move on to Ohio, then he's got to win a lot of other places around the perimeter.
Jerry, one of the interesting things we've been seeing playing out in the last few days is Republicans acting as though Pennsylvania is in play. In fact, my understanding is Governor Romney made a stop in Pennsylvania today. Is that for real?
Well, it was for real, I think, in the Romney campaign's mind for this reason. The polls certainly tightened up in Pennsylvania over the last couple of weeks. Plus, Pennsylvania was a state where everybody voted today, so there was no Obama machine that could turn out the early vote in Pennsylvania. Plus, it hadn't seen a lot of the advertising through the course of the campaign, which meant a lot of the ads that basically took apart Mitt Romney in the summer as a sort of a rapacious capitalist and somebody who you couldn't really trust who would ship your job to China, those never played in Pennsylvania. So the Romney camp saw it as a state that was close enough and where the slate was relatively blank, so they ought to go in and make a try there. There was a chance, I don't think it was ever a great chance, and we'll find out tonight, but it certainly was a plausible chance.
Yeah, let's move to the U.S. Senate. If we can get that chart up here. It's 53-47 right now. Democrats control it. Republicans would have to pick up 4 seats in order to have a majority in the Senate. These are the critical races right here on the screen. Do you see any chance, looking at those 10, 11 races, that the Republicans can win the Senate?
There is a chance. It's not the chance we thought we'd be talking about tonight if we had been having this conversation 6 months ago. And Alan, frankly, this is the one that has Republicans here in Washington just are wailing and gnashing their teeth. They fear maybe they've let go, or they've missed the chance to win the Senate. And that's because the candidates didn't turn out to be as good as they thought in states like Indiana and Missouri in particular. And because Elizabeth Warren made a late surge in that huge, closely watched race in Massachusetts. So they're looking at the math and saying, man, it's not there the way we thought it would be there. I think there's still a chance it could go that way, but you got to keep an eye on states like Indiana, Missouri, and hope that Scott Brown is better in Massachusetts than he looked as he was in the last few days of that campaign.
They've also had some disappointments in, for instance, Senator Olympia Snowe in Maine decided to retire rather than a moderate Republican retire rather than keep up the battle in the Senate. That's a seat that they may well lose tonight, right?
Well, they'll likely lose it to an independent, Angus King, who's probably going to caucus with the Democrats. So you may end up with 3 independents in the Senate, all of whom are functionally Democrats. And so that's a pretty good picture for the Democrats. You know, the important thing to remember about the Senate, though, is that this is going to be, and this goes back to the point you made at the very top, Alan, this is going to be a very closely balanced Senate, which is a metaphor for the way political power is very closely balanced in the country as a whole. Yeah. Nobody's really in charge in the Senate when they only have 51 seats. Yep. That's going to be the battleground for everything.
And I would point out that King has been declared the winner in Maine. As you said, he is an independent, but he is expected to caucus with the Democrats. So that's Olympia Snowe's current seat, a critical loss.
And Alan, it does look as if he's winning in Maine.
Yeah. Now let's take a look at the battle for the House of Representatives, if we can pull that one up. Of course, all the members of the House are standing for election. Because of the big Tea Party win 2 years ago, there are a lot of Republicans in kind of critical districts that are on the watch list. Democrats were hoping to pick up some seats there. Do you think they'll succeed in doing that?
This is the least suspenseful part of the night, Alan. The House will be in Republican hands when the night is over. I talked to a smart Republican who's paid a lot of attention to House races just yesterday. He said they might win a seat or 2, they might lose 6 or 7 seats, but it's in that range. And that's a range that leaves the House in the control of Republicans, maybe with a slightly diminished majority, but enough for John Boehner to be Speaker comfortably after tonight.
So the most likely outcome there is continued Republican control. A little harder to call in the Senate, but a good chance you have continued Democratic control. But as you point out, even a majority in the Senate doesn't mean that you really have control. Divided government will continue. And, of course, the critical challenge for whoever wins elections tonight is going to be to figure out how to make divided government work, because it hasn't worked very well for the last period of years.
Right, exactly. And you know, you're facing this bizarre possibility that $5 or $6 billion may have been spent on this campaign to produce an absolute status quo outcome. Nothing will have changed.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of that, frankly.
Well, we will give you plenty of opportunities to tell us what you make of it over the course of the night. I know we got a
Okay, fair
camera
enough.
right there at your desk while you're working. We'll come back to you as more results come in.